Everybody out there, it's Pastor John with your Midweek Reflection. I had a really good conversation in our Wednesday growth group about last week's message, and so I'm going to just hash that out a little bit before previewing this coming week. Last week we talked about Jesus' politics of Jubilee, and we said Jubilee in ancient Israel was every 50th year. Everyone went back to their family's land. All right, so the land had been equally distributed when the Israelites entered the Promised Land among tribes and families. And after 50 years, whether you had spent the last 49 years going in debt or becoming a servant or gaining wealth and gaining land and expanding your empire, every 50th year, everyone went back to an equal playing field. They went back to their family's land. And we were acknowledging in our group that there are some difficulties in thinking about applying that politics today. And one of them is kind of the idea that whenever we hear the word distribution, we think of socialism, communism, Marxism. And that is kind of putting the Bible, as we've talked about, into our preconceived partisan and political boxes. Because what you see in ancient Israel is not Marxism, it's not communism, it's not socialism. Actually, it's almost a purer form of capitalism in the sense that you don't let aristocracy kind of creep into the system. So after 50 years, there's a reset. So some people aren't starting with more and some people starting with less, starting their lives in debt. That actually everyone gets a fair shot to work hard and earn a living and gain resources and material wealth or prosperity. So there's that. But second, in our society, we don't have the same starting point as ancient Israel did. So in ancient Israel, they have the starting point where everyone has this equal distribution of land. That's not true in our country because we're a nation of immigrants, because of slavery, because of a lot of things. We can't just say, okay, everyone go back to your family's land from 1700. I'm like, well, my family wasn't here until the 1900s. Or, what about slaves? None of them owned land. The African American community, none of them owned land here in 1700. So it just doesn't make sense. And so what we talked about was Jubilee principles. That when we can, what we're doing is seeking to level the playing field. And that could be with legislation. That could be with debt forgiveness. Say we loaned someone money and they're struggling to get it back. What if we just said, hey, forget about it. Don't worry about it. Let it go. No debt. Okay? Or if we looked at other groups that have historically been kept from having an equal opportunity, whether because of their race or because of the part of the country they live in or the jobs that they've had. And we need to look and be saying, okay, how can we help this group get back on an even playing field with others. And that in some cases means bringing some folks down and saying, well, you actually didn't earn all of that. You started with millions of dollars. And, so it doesn't really make sense to say that you're on an even playing field with this person who started in debt, for instance. So applying Jubilee principles within our system is kind of the goal. This coming week, we're going to get more, we'll say concrete, because we've been looking at some more political philosophy and Jesus' vision for politics and how he engages in the polis. This week, we're going to look at how Jesus actually does it. And it's going to expand our imaginations about what political action looks like. Because, of course, Jesus didn't have a vote. Jesus didn't have a chance to elect a certain candidate for emperor or whatever the case was, or chief priest or what have you. He didn't live in a democracy. And so how did Jesus seek and pursue his political vision? That's what we're going to look at today. And what we're going to see, this Sunday, what we're going to see, I think, is that how Jesus engages in politics is very relevant to where we can start with our political engagement. Not necessarily with a vote, not necessarily with campaigning for someone, but with how we use our tables and who we sit around our tables with. And so that's really the question I encourage you to consider as we enter into Sunday's worship service is who sits around your table? Whose stories are you hearing? Whose experiences are you listening to and paying attention to? whose whose tables. It's a metaphor in some ways for a relationship. So who sits at your table, or whose table are you sitting at? And what kind of diversity is there in life experience and race and religion, religious tradition, in socioeconomic status? What kind of diversity is there? Who's at your table, and who's at our table as the church? So those are some things to think about as you prepare for worship on Sunday. As always, I look forward to worshiping with you as we live the gospel life together. Until then, may God bless you.